Let's talk about what culture is. And on your first page there, you have some description. Culture is the list of characteristics of a way of life, or a broader definition, it's the system of behavior, ideas, and products of a particular society. And both of those definitions still are very much simplistic, overly simplistic. You can't really get a grip on what culture is from those definitions. So the further statements expand on that. Culture provides the way people structure their lives, interpret their experiences, and evaluate the behavior of others. Enculturation, there's the process that we mentioned earlier, is the process by which a person, usually a child, learns and conforms to a culture. It's the process by which a person takes on the values, expressions, customs, language, assumptions, and problem-solving methods of a society. Sometimes it's also called socialization, but enculturation is probably the more common word. And really, none of us can really evaluate the extent of that we have been enculturated. And the things that we take for granted, like you would assume that when you come into a classroom that there are lights on and there are chairs to sit on and paper will be passed out. Those are all cultural aspects. There are places in the world where they would not be sitting on chairs. They would not be sitting in this arrangement. They might be in a circle. They might be sitting on the floor. They might be outside. And teaching, the way teaching is done, there's a lot of variety. The way you're dressed is totally influenced by your culture. What you think is being dressed right, or being dressed well, or being dressed up, or casual, all of that is defined by your culture. And you think of it as just normal. You get up, you dress, and if you see somebody that doesn't fit into those parameters, you know, it surprises you. You may laugh, or you may point them out, or whatever, but they may come from a different culture, and the things that are normal to you are not normal to them. At the Walmart where I go, there's a man who is a greeter at the door, and that might be where old professors go when they can't teach anymore. They stand at Walmart and say, "Hello, welcome to Walmart." But this guy, he has a turban wrapped around his head, big purple turban, and he obviously is very much out of place there in Indianapolis with a big turban wrapped around his head. He, I think, is from an Indian background. But to him, we probably look strange. He's probably thinking, these poor people, they don't know enough to put their turban on in the morning. And he would rather look different from the people he's around, but feel normal, than to conform to what looks normal around him but doesn't seem right. Culture is based on observation of what is normal. It's motivated by human needs. It's guided by moral judgments. Now you may say, well, what I believe about what is right and what is wrong is just from the Bible. I believe what the Bible teaches. Well, you may think that. But the Bible is very culturally interpreted. And a lot of missionaries have faced the challenge when they have landed in a strange and new place and they're trying to show people why they should do something, and they can't find it in the Bible, and they thought it was there. You know, they assumed it was there. And they have to stop and think, well, maybe this isn't the way it has to be. Maybe a church doesn't have to have a board up in the front that says attendance today, attendance last week, attendance a year ago, offering today, offering last week, offering a year ago. But maybe that's not in the Bible, you know. There are a lot of things, and things that are a lot more crucial than that, that we just assume that are the way to do it. We'll talk a lot more about that stuff later. Culture shapes one's assumptions of what is normal. Culture determines what is socially acceptable. It determines what is admired and what is scorned. The Russians have a saying, Germans make good suitcases. Now, that sounds like a compliment, right?
Yeah.
Okay? But you might suspect the fact that Russians are saying it about Germans might give you a clue that it's not intended to be a compliment. But you'd have to really delve into Russian culture a little bit to figure out where they're coming from. Germans are known for doing everything exact and precise. They have good factories. They make good cars. Even in Russia, the best cars to have are the ones from Germany. Russians know that. You can get a Volkswagen van. I mean, that is great. So Germans, they do things right. But to the Russian mind, that is all low-level stuff. To be attentive to details and to be able to crank out a good suitcase, well, not to say no Russian would be putting it too far, but a Russian likes to create something big, something magnificent, something poetic, and he would rather attempt something big and fail than to succeed at something small. And if he does have to do something small, he isn't going to do it very well. Okay? If he has to work in a factory making suitcases, they're probably not going to be very good suitcases. Because if he does a good job at making suitcases, that means that he's just a good suitcase maker. It categorizes him as the kind of guy who makes suitcases. But he may not consider himself a suitcase maker. He's a poet or a writer or whatever. He may never have published anything, but that's his goal. And so, whether he ever gets anything published or not, he's sure not going to turn out good suitcases because that's not what he wants to be. Okay? So when they say Germans make good suitcases, that's actually a criticism. That's despising, that's looking down on them for what we would see as a strength. Okay? But culture determines what is admired and what is scorned. When it comes to status, who is the most important person? Who is respected? Culture determines that. Criteria for status, stages of status. In other words, how do you move up? Okay, you want to get higher status, how do you move up? Promotion system and the symbols of status. There's a story about a civilization, a very primitive civilization, that they chopped their wood with stone axes. And it was a hot place, so they weren't chopping a huge amount of wood. It wasn't like they were cutting wood to heat their homes. Some places don't have to worry about heating their homes. But they still needed wood to cook, so there was a little bit of wood chopping to do. But not a great deal. But stone axes were hard to make. It takes a lot of skill to chip this out of a stone that is hard enough to cut wood. So there were only a few of them around. And so whenever somebody needed one, they usually had to go borrow it from the closest person who had it. And so these axes, because they were valuable, they weren't just left lying around. They were kept by the oldest men in the village. And so the old man would be a custodian of this stone axe, and he'd have it in his hut. And if a young man needed to cut some wood, he would come and say, "Grandfather, can I borrow the stone axe today?" And he says, "Yes, my son." And he goes in, he gets it, brings it out, and entrusts it to him, and the young man takes it, and he does his work, and he brings it back. And so there's this sense of accountability, and this stone axe carries a measure of respect. It's a symbol of respect that the old man deserves. And it was a tremendous promotion when a person is getting up in years and maybe some other old fellow dies and the stone axe that he has been taking care of is passed to you because you're now the closest one to his age. And so it was a lot of status. Okay, well, then some well-meaning Europeans or Americans come into the area and they happen to visit this village. And they say, "Oh, these poor people, look, they're chopping wood with these primitive stone axes." And somebody says, "Hey, tell you what, next order of supplies we make from the States, tell them to send us over 40 nice steel hatchets, and we're just going to really bless these people. We're just really going to do something for them." And that's what happened. And one day they come in and they've got all these great steel hatchets and they pass them out. And, you probably would never predict, they could never have predicted what was going to happen. But they almost destroyed that little civilization. Because now having the stone axe didn't mean anything. Okay? Nobody is ever going to come and ask you to borrow your stone axe. Okay? And so all of this thing that symbolized of respect, "Grandfather, may I borrow the axe?" And you're put in the position of asking kindly, and he generously gives. Now there's nothing for you to ask for. You don't have to show that respect. He's got something that nobody is asking for that used to be very important. And so he doesn't know really how he is being respected. And so the thing began to disintegrate, and the village actually the society just about fell apart before new systems were put in place, new ways of showing respect of that status. Now, that may seem very simple, but whenever you go to be a missionary, even if it's a short trip or whatever you do, you have to stop and think, what do these things represent? Every custom is meeting some kind of a need in that culture. And you've got to be careful about changing. And it may be a terrible custom. It may be something that nobody should do anywhere. But you need to think, okay, this custom is meeting a need of some kind for this culture. So if we're going to tell them to quit doing this, we've got to figure out what is going to meet that need instead. Okay, we'll talk a lot more about that later. We are mostly unconscious of the way our own culture has shaped us. You know, you can use your eyes all day long and never think about your eyes, right? Most of you probably have not thought about your eyes all day today, but you've used your eyes. The only times you think about your eye is if something is bothering it. You know, if you're having trouble seeing, or you get a gnat in it, or something, then you think about your eye. But otherwise, you just assume that the way you see things is just the way they are. Until something happens to challenge that. Maybe you're with people who see it a totally different way. Then you stop and think about, especially if we came in here, you know, they used to have chalkboards. Anybody remember chalkboards? There were black ones and there were green ones. Okay? And if you came into a classroom and to you the blackboard looked black, it was a blackboard, and you mentioned something to somebody about the blackboard and they said, well, it's actually green. You look at it, no, it's black. It's as black as can be. No, they say it's green. And so you turn to somebody else, isn't that black? And they say, no, that's green. And you ask around, and everybody in the room says it's green. Okay, what would you do next? Somebody tell me, what would you do next? Huh? Go up and touch it? Yeah, well, but you're trying to verify the color. So, what would you do?
Turn off the lights and it's black.
Think about this. Everybody, I think, would do about the same thing in that situation. What would you do?
Get something green to compare it.
Okay, that's an idea. To compare it and maybe confirm with others what they think what color this is. I think what many people would do, they would suspect that some joke was being pulled on them, and they would go into the hall and get another witness, right? They'd say, come in here, look, what color is this? Okay, now what if that person said, it's green, and you get somebody else and they say it's green? What is going to happen next? You're going to start doubting your eyes. Okay? You're going to start doubting your own color perception. And so, culture is a little bit like that. We just see things and we just assume that that's the way it is. We don't stop and think about the way we think, or the way we see. Let me give you a big word. You use this in conversation somewhere. Metacognitive thinking. Anybody know what metacognitive thinking is?
To think about one's own thinking.
All right, that's good. How many of you have read the book I Believe, published by a Bible college near here? Okay, that term is actually in that book. So metacognitive thinking is thinking about thinking. In other words, thinking about how you think. And so that's a little bit related to culture study, because you stop and think about how, and and there's a lot of people don't ever even think besides stopping to think about thinking. So this is just an overview of the scope of culture.